mother faked a critical, debilitating illness for 6 months, controlling every aspect of my life and jeopardizing my wedding until my fiancé uncovered the sick truth. This is the story of how my life was stolen by a lie and how my fiancé, Jake, 34M, became my unlikely detective. I, 32F, had everything planned: a career promotion, a beautiful apartment, and a September wedding to the most supportive man alive. Then 6 months ago, my mother, Evelyn, 60F, got sick. The initial call was a terrifying, breathless message from my dad. He was vague. Something about blood pressure spikes, mysterious fatigue, and a complicated autoimmune response. The initial diagnosis was kept fuzzy, a constellation of symptoms that made her frail, demanding, and requiring constant care. My mother has always been a high-control person, micromanaging my life since childhood, but this felt different, urgent, and terrifyingly real. I panicked. The plan stopped instantly. My first reaction, rooted in genuine love and fear, was to drop everything. I called Jake and tearfully explained that the wedding was off. We wouldn't cancel the marriage, but we had to indefinitely postpone the event and all planning. I moved out of our shared apartment and back into my childhood home to become her primary caregiver. This was the first and most successful move in her twisted game. I justified it by saying family comes first, pushing down the deep ache of disappointment. Convinced I was doing the right thing for my critically ill mother, moving back home was like stepping back in time, but worse. It wasn't just the physical care, the meticulous meal prep, the enforced silence in the house, the constant running of errands for her, special medications, which she insisted only I could pick up. It was the emotional weight of being perpetually on call. Every day felt like a medical emergency waiting to happen. Evelyn required my presence almost 24/7 if I tried to work remotely from my old room. She would call me downstairs for a sip of water or to adjust a cushion, tasks my father or the hired daytime nurse could easily handle. She was strategic. Her worst flare-ups always happened the moment Jake called, or when I was scheduling a video meeting. I started canceling commitments. My promotion review was deferred because I couldn't commit to the required travel. My friends stopped calling, realizing I was essentially tethered. I felt guilty about the resentment building up inside me. I was mourning the loss of my planned future, the wedding, the move to a new city Jake and I had planned, the career trajectory, all while simultaneously fearing the loss of my mother. This internal conflict, the duty versus the crushing reality, was slowly eroding my mental health. I felt trapped in a loop of fear and frustration, constantly seeking validation that I was doing enough. Jake was initially a rock. He would visit every weekend, bringing groceries, helping my dad with chores, and trying to inject some normalcy into my life. But the atmosphere at my parents' house was poisonous to him. He's a rational, logic-driven engineer, and Evelyn's illness didn't follow logic. She had no consistent diagnosis, no treatment plan that wasn't contradictory, and her symptoms seemed to shift depending on the audience. Jake started noticing things I was too exhausted and emotionally compromised to see. He pointed out once that Evelyn, who supposedly couldn't walk without assistance due to extreme dizziness, had sprinted across the kitchen to catch a vase that my cat knocked over and then instantly collapsed back into her chair when she saw him looking. She blamed it on an adrenaline rush, a miracle moment granted by sheer motherly instinct. Another time he observed her on a video call with her bridge club, a call she didn't realize I was monitoring from the laundry room, talking animatedly and laughing with absolutely none of the shortness of breath or slurred speech she displayed minutes later when I came in to give her medicine. These moments weren't isolated. They were small, jarring discrepancies that Jake started logging mentally, noting the time, the environment, and the audience. He didn't want to accuse my mother, but his unease was palpable. Evelyn's control became more stringent as my life became smaller. She insisted that my presence was the only thing that stabilized her blood pressure, effectively creating a direct correlation between my absence and her medical risk. This meant I couldn't leave the house for more than an hour, and only then if I left my phone on speaker and within sight of my dad. The stress of the canceled wedding was weaponized. Every time I mentioned trying to rebook the venue or even setting a small future date, she would have a sudden episode. Once, Jake and I were discussing eloping quietly in the backyard, and she overheard. Within minutes, she was gasping, clutching her chest and demanding I call 911. We rushed her to the ER, only for the doctors to find nothing physically wrong, concluding it was a panic attack. The entire ordeal was designed to punish me for trying to regain control of my own timeline. The financial aspect was also a strain. She insisted on very expensive, holistic supplements that weren't covered by insurance, demanding I pay for them out of my savings, claiming they were the only things keeping her alive. This manipulation was strategic, empty my financial resources, so I couldn't afford to move out even if I wanted to. Jake finally reached his breaking point about 4 months into this nightmare. He sat me down on a Tuesday night, having driven 2 hours after work, and said, "We need to talk about what is happening, because what I am seeing is not a sick person. It's a captive situation." He laid out his observations logically, the inconsistent symptoms, the lack of any concrete specialist report, which she always claimed were lost in the mail, and the clear pattern of symptoms worsening only when I focused on my own life. He didn't flat out call her a liar, but he suggested strongly that her condition was psychosomatic, or worse, deliberate manipulation. I lashed out at him. I accused him of being insensitive, of not understanding the weight of watching your mother mother suffer, and of being selfish for prioritizing our wedding over her health. I was projecting my guilt and exhaustion onto him, unable to face the dark possibility that he might be right. The fight was devastating. Jake left, giving me a quiet ultimatum. I love you, but I cannot marry a woman whose life is perpetually on hold for a disease that seems to exist only when you are happy. I'm going to find the truth, and if I'm wrong, I will apologize profusely and we will resume our plans. But if I'm right, we need to leave. Now, following our massive fight, Jake backed off his direct accusations, but he didn't stop looking. His focus shifted to the medical records. Evelyn claimed to have visited 3 different top specialists: a neurologist, a rheumatologist, and an endocrinologist, all of whom she said agreed her case was too complex for a quick diagnosis. The problem? When I tried to access my mother's health portal to coordinate her care, a very normal caregiver duty, she shut me down instantly, claiming she had privacy settings enabled and that looking at the records would stress her out and cause a flare. This was the first major red flag for Jake. A genuinely ill person, especially one who needed constant care, would be insisting that their primary caregiver review all records. Jake started making discreet calls to the hospitals she named, using careful general phrasing such as inquiring about procedures or typical appointment wait times. He slowly gathered information that suggested Evelyn hadn't had the in-depth diagnostic tests she claimed. One hospital administrator, speaking generally about HIPAA protocols, mentioned that if a patient claimed to be seeing 3 specialists but only had 1 basic wellness visit on file in the last year, it was highly suspicious. Another inconsistency arose concerning physical therapy. Evelyn claimed her mobility was severely restricted and insisted on twice-weekly physical therapy sessions, always requiring me to drive her, wait, and drive her back. These sessions were always scheduled far away, about an hour round trip. Jake decided to observe one of these sessions. He followed me and Evelyn, then parked down the street and walked past the clinic window. What he saw didn't make sense. Evelyn walked in with a walker and a pained, dramatic limp, visibly leaning on the therapist. When they went into a private room, Jake waited. When the session was over, he watched her come out. The public part of the return trip, getting into the car, was always the most labored performance. However, one day she was early, and the PT session finished before she expected me. Jake watched from his parked car as Evelyn stood outside the clinic, pulled a small snack bar from her purse, and leaned against the wall. For a full 5 minutes, she stood perfectly straight, shifting her weight effortlessly, and even performed a small, gentle stretch. The exact movements she claimed caused her unbearable pain. The PT had stepped back inside, leaving her alone, and the performance had dropped instantly. The technological aspect of her illness was also strange. Evelyn claimed her condition required constant monitoring of her vitals, especially her heart rate and blood oxygen levels, leading her to demand top-of-the-line wearable monitoring devices. She insisted on one specific brand of blood pressure cuff and a pulse oximeter that were conveniently prone to giving erratic readings that only she could interpret correctly. Jake, being the engineer, decided to take a look at the equipment when Evelyn was supposedly napping. He discovered that the specialized blood pressure cuff had a small piece of clear tape, strategically placed over the sensor, slightly displacing it, which guaranteed a high, erratic reading every time. He quietly removed the tape and ran a test on himself. The reading was perfectly normal. He then checked the pulse oximeter. He noticed that the battery was draining suspiciously fast, and upon opening the compartment, found that she had replaced the standard battery with one that was slightly too large, causing an intermittent fault that would randomly drop the oxygen saturation reading dramatically. He didn't fix it. He simply documented the modification with high-resolution photos. Realizing this wasn't just faking symptoms, it was manufacturing the data. The technological discoveries pushed Jake past the point of casual investigation. He needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be explained away as anxiety or a placebo effect. He hired a private investigator, PI, through a contact at his firm, keeping the entire operation strictly secret from me. The PI's instructions were simple: track Evelyn's movements on days she claimed to be bedridden, or only leaving for doctor appointments. The PI focused on weekdays, when I was attempting to work, and my father was supposedly running errands. Within a week, the PI delivered the first round of unsettling evidence. Evelyn was not, in fact, spending her days in medical distress. She was driving her own car, the one she claimed she was too dizzy to operate, to a high-end spa an hour away. The reports included multiple time-stamped photographs of Evelyn getting a deep tissue massage and then spending an hour chatting with friends at a cafe, looking perfectly healthy, energetic, and completely unburdened by her alleged illness. The PI also tracked her secret trips to a small private post office box, which was particularly odd given she claimed to be too weak to check the mailbox at home. This was proof of premeditated deception, not just a desperate need for attention. The PI's next focus was the financial drain. I mentioned earlier the expensive, non-FDA-approved holistic supplements. Evelyn had been draining my savings account for these, claiming they were the only things preventing a complete system shutdown. Jake asked the PI to track the addresses of the 3 specialty pharmacies where she insisted these supplements were purchased. The PI discovered that 2 of the addresses were simply drop shipping warehouses for general vitamins, and the third was the private post office box where Evelyn was making her secret trips. The PI also accessed general information regarding the bank accounts my parents shared, discreetly checking for large, unexplained transfers that aligned with my savings being depleted. It turned out that the money I was spending on her fake medical needs wasn't going to supplements at all. It was being transferred into a high-yield savings account opened in her name alone, an account that had been opened just a week before her diagnosis. This wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was calculated financial abuse, designed to make me dependent on her for shelter and care, essentially trapping me in the house and ensuring I couldn't afford to jumpstart my life again. A secondary, painful discovery was the extent of my father's involvement. My dad, 62M, had always been the quiet enabler, but I truly believed he was just stressed and overwhelmed by his wife's illness. The PI's surveillance revealed something far more damning. In one series of photographs, the PI documented my dad dropping Evelyn off at the spa. He didn't stay. He drove directly to a hardware store, bought a specific type of high-tech security camera, and then drove home. Jake immediately realized what was happening. My father was installing a surveillance system in the house to ensure that Evelyn's symptoms were only ever witnessed by family members and that she wasn't caught out of character by the daytime nurse or maintenance workers. He was actively participating in the cover-up, not just a passive victim of her sickness. The video evidence of him setting up the camera system, combined with the lack of any genuine medical intervention on his part, confirmed his complicity. This hit me harder than the discovery of the lie itself. The two people I trusted most in the world, the two people who were supposed to protect me, were actively collaborating to sabotage my life for their own control and comfort. With 2 weeks worth of photos, videos, and financial documentation from the PI, Jake knew he couldn't just tell me. He had to show me, or I would fall back on the programmed instinct to defend my mother. He drove me to a secluded park bench far from my parents' house, brought his laptop, and told me he had something he needed me to see, promising to support me no matter how painful it was. He started with the financial records, the bank statements showing my savings going directly into her secret account. The transfers were labeled innocuously, things like supplement fund or specialist fees, but the receiving account was undeniable. Then came the photographs. My bedridden mother enjoying a deep tissue massage, smiling without a single sign of fatigue or pain. The final piece of evidence was the video, high-resolution footage of Evelyn, alone in the garage, jogging on a hidden treadmill for a solid 10 minutes, completely unencumbered. When she heard the garage door opener, my father arriving, she instantly fell into a dramatic limp, clutching her side and demanding water. The footage was spliced, showing the transition from a perfectly healthy person to a patient in seconds. Seeing the video was a punch to the gut that physically winded me. I didn't cry or scream. I just felt an icy, profound stillness. For 6 months, I had sacrificed my career, postponed my wedding, lost friendships, and depleted my savings for a phantom. The guilt I felt for my suppressed resentment vanished, replaced by a pure, burning rage and the nauseating feeling of being utterly betrayed. Every memory of her suffering, every tear I cried over her prognosis, every moment of self-blame for not being a better caregiver, it was all a performance, a meticulous, evil script written just for me. Jake held my hand, letting me absorb the sheer scale of the deception. The hardest part was reconciling the woman on the screen, healthy, energetic, manipulative, with the frail, demanding mother I had been tending to. I realized her episodes weren't panic attacks. They were panic attacks about losing control when her script was challenged. The true illness wasn't physical, it was her pathological need to keep me dependent and close. The betrayal by my father was a secondary agonizing wound. He knew, he helped her. He protected the lie, not me. Jake and I spent the next 48 hours in a sterile, hyper-focused state, planning the exit and the confrontation. We agreed that this could not be handled quietly. A private confrontation would result in immediate, violent gaslighting and denial. She needed to be confronted in a way that pinned her with facts she couldn't squirm out of. We needed an audience, a small group of family, members who weren't deeply enmeshed in her narrative, my aunt, dad's sister, and my uncle, Evelyn's brother, both of whom had expressed quiet skepticism about the vague diagnosis. The setting had to be controlled. We decided on a Sunday afternoon family tea at my parents' house, giving us a controlled environment but also the home court advantage of having the evidence right there. The plan was meticulous. Jake would secretly record the entire conversation, and I would present the evidence in a non-emotional, factual sequence, starting with the bank records and escalating to the video footage. The goal wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was extraction and a definitive closure to the toxic cycle. I needed to see her face when the lie crumbled, not for satisfaction, but for the clarity needed to cut her out completely. The days leading up to the confrontation were surreal. I maintained the facade of the dutiful, worried daughter. I fetched her water, administered the fake supplements, and listened patiently to her complaints about her tingling extremities. Inside, I felt nothing but ice. I watched her act, noting the dramatic sighs, the excessive use of the walker, the carefully timed groans, and the way she would clutch the side of the sofa to steady herself. All performances I now knew were completely unnecessary. It was chilling to see the premeditated effort involved in maintaining this elaborate 6-month lie. Jake, meanwhile, prepared the technological setup. He loaded all the evidence onto a small mirrored USB drive, ensuring the video would play instantly. He also configured his phone to record the conversation discreetly and sync it immediately to a cloud server in case Evelyn or my father tried to destroy the device. My father father was blissfully unaware, operating in his own complicit fog, occasionally telling me how strong I was being. His praise, once a source of comfort, now felt like an insult. I packed my most essential belongings, documents, sentimental items, in 2 bags and stored them in Jake's car trunk, ready for our immediate departure once the dust settled. Sunday arrived, and the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, though only Jake and I knew why. My Aunt Carol and Uncle David arrived promptly. They were visibly uncomfortable. Aunt Carol had always suspected Evelyn's flair for the dramatic, and Uncle David, a retired physician's assistant, had openly questioned the lack of specialist reports. Evelyn, of course, was in full frail patient mode, pale makeup, a luxurious blanket draped over her legs, and a small shaky voice. My father was attending to her, fussing over the tea service. We sat down, and the pleasantries were minimal. I cut straight to the chase, ignoring the bewildered look on my mother's face. I announced, "Thank you all for coming. I need to address something critically important," and I asked Uncle David and Aunt Carol to be here as witnesses because I cannot do this alone. Evelyn, sensing the shift in tone, immediately grabbed her chest and started the gasping performance. I ignored it completely and looked directly at my father. "Dad, I need you to step away from Mom. This involves your actions as well, and I need a clear space to present facts." My father, startled by my authoritative tone, hesitated but moved away. Evelyn, realizing her usual fainting routine wasn't working, dropped her hand and stared at me with pure hatred. I began the presentation, my voice level and calm, contrasting sharply with the rising panic in the room. 6 months ago, I put my life on hold for a medical emergency. I postponed my wedding, deferred my career, and spent significant portions of my savings on specialized care. I want to start with the savings. I pushed a printout of the bank transfers across the coffee table toward my mother. "Evelyn, can you explain why the funds I withdrew for your holistic supplements were immediately transferred into a new private high-yield savings account under your name, opened a week before your initial symptoms appeared?" Her eyes darted wildly. "How dare you look at my accounts? That's private. That's a mistake." "Misfiled," she shrieked, her voice suddenly strong and ringing with panic. My father stepped forward. "Sweetheart, you're being hysterical. Leave your mother alone. She's ill." Aunt Carol put a hand on my father's arm, urging him to stop. Recognizing the desperation in Evelyn's eyes, I shook my head slowly, meeting my mother's gaze. "It's not hysterical. Mom, it's evidence." Jake plugged the laptop into the TV screen, the large display now dominating the living room. "This is the physical therapist's clinic," I narrated, pointing to the first static photo of Evelyn standing perfectly straight outside the building. "And this is video footage from your garage, taken on Tuesday afternoon, when you claimed to be bedridden." I hit play. The sound of the whirring treadmill filled the room, and there was Evelyn, wearing yoga pants and a workout top, jogging. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of her perfectly healthy feet pounding the machine. Then came the damning moment. The garage door begins to open. Evelyn instantly looks up, yanks the emergency cord on the treadmill, and begins a theatrical, panicked collapse onto the nearby folding chair, clutching her chest and groaning as my father walks in. The visual proof, undeniable and damning, destroyed her entire narrative in 30 seconds. Aunt Carol gasped and covered her mouth. Uncle David simply shook his head, looking disgusted. Evelyn screamed a single terrifying word, "Traitor!" directed not at Jake, but at my father, for allowing the camera to be set up in the first place, or perhaps at me for uncovering the truth. The room erupted. Evelyn launched into a frantic torrent of lies and manipulation. She claimed the video was doctored. The bank statements were for my own protection, a secret trust fund for my wedding, and that I was trying to kill her by stressing her out. She used every gaslighting tactic in the book. My father, however, went quiet. When I directly asked him why he helped her fake her illness, he crumbled. He mumbled that she started the lie and then threatened him with divorce and financial ruin if he didn't comply, claiming she was doing it for my own good because I was pulling away from the family. He admitted to installing the internal surveillance to protect her performance, not to protect me. I told him his complicity was unforgivable. I turned to my mother, who was now hysterically weeping, fully committed to the role of the wounded martyr. "You canceled my wedding. You risked my job. You stole my life. And you risked your own health for attention and control," I said, finally letting my voice crack with emotion. "You are not sick. You are evil. And I'm gone." Jake immediately grabbed my hand. We walked straight out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of her lie and my childhood. Jake and I drove straight to our apartment, retrieved the emergency bags, and checked into a hotel. We blocked my parents' numbers and social media instantly. Aunt Carol and Uncle David reached out later, confirming they were shocked and that they fully supported my decision to go no contact NC. They also confirmed they would be sharing the video, evidence with other extended family to mitigate the inevitable smear campaign Evelyn would launch. The immediate future involves legal action to recoup the funds she stole from my savings, and finally, restarting our wedding plans, a smaller, simpler ceremony this time, focused purely on Jake and me. I am currently in trauma therapy, processing the 6 months of intense emotional abuse disguised as caregiving. I feel an overwhelming sense of relief, but also a deep, aching sadness for the mother I thought I had. I told my father I would speak to him only after Evelyn was entirely out of my life, which means he must choose between the lie and his daughter. The confrontation was public and brutal, but I needed to destroy the lie completely to free myself. Aita for confronting my mother so publicly with undeniable undeniable proof, knowing it would humiliate her and potentially isolate her from the family she desperately tries to control.